Hi, this is a quick first run through of some slides that we've pulled together, which tries to articulate the severity of some of the problems that we've currently got and the necessity for an electronic patient record type approach for BCU. Or in our world, what we're proposing is a approach via a digital healthcare platform type approach, as opposed to a traditional EPR type approach that we might see in other countries such as England to address some of our gaps. It's notwithstanding the fact that we are also doing at a holistic level some assessments in terms of our maturity from a HIMSS point of view and a class point of view. They're not mentioned in this deck, but what this deck is primarily trying to do is articulate what the problems are we're trying to solve with our current applications landscape and our current clinical processes and practices based on the use of our existing system and, of course, these existing systems and, of course, the Welsh provided W systems and the like, what the problems are associated with all of that, and it proposes a way forward to address some of those problems from a technology perspective. That's what the purpose of this presentation is, and we're really keen to get views very quickly back in terms of if that makes sense or it's aligned with some of the thinking nationally, and whether or not we can accelerate the delivery of something to start addressing these issues, because we think it's not something that can be resolved overnight, but we need to start fairly immediately to address some of the more serious sort of issues. What we'll get here is the slide deck is split into different sections. There will be a section, and I'm going to get into the slide deck now, which is a bit which will be presented by the CCIO, so Ambu, Dr. Ambu, and Jason Walker, Jane and Augustine, our CCIO team, will be presenting their perspective on some of our pathways and the disconnects from an information perspective, which leads to the necessity for a combined electronic patient record to assist with some of that. So they will articulate some of that. I'll skim through some of that, just articulating at a very high level some of the things, give you a feel for what some of those things are. When we do the presentation properly, Ambu will present that himself or one of the CCIO team. We'll then get into the technology aspects, which I'll go into, and then we'll leave it there. So I'm just going to start by starting this presentation. Bear with me 1 second. If I just start that slideshow from the beginning and switch scenes. So this is the deck, the challenge and the proposed way forward. So deck starts with session objectives, shared understanding amongst all about what the problems are and the scale of them, an understanding of the strategic EPR options available to address the problems and how. We're going to articulate an estimated costed 1-year proposal for delivery. We are hopefully, through this deck and iterations of this deck, are looking to establish exec and DHCW support for our route forward and approach. So I'm really keen, Helen, to get together with a very small group to start with ASAP on this, with due regard to our future, really. And what we'd probably do is go to a very light touch strategic outline case based on some of this and on the high level, the level costs. Okay, so first of all, the clinical's perspective, as I mentioned before, Dr. Ambu is going to present this. So I'm not going to go through a lot of this, but basically what this talks about is Dr. Ambu will take us through the acute assessments and admission pathway. Please bear in mind that the things that are highlighted in this presentation are the same across many other pathways, and in particular talking about clerking. Just letting the dog out. And it talks about how we gather information from multiple different silos of data. That's the key thing here, and some of the impact that has on our patients. What we've got in this section is we have got some flowcharts. So we brought an independent in to look at some of our pathways, observe some of those pathways, the handoffs, etc., and we demonstrate those. We've got a collection of these, and what they show is the different handovers between different systems, whether they're paper-based or whether they're verbal communication between clinicians. And this is the ambulance handover, for instance, where, as you can see, the ambulance paramedic attends with the patient. There's a verbal handover to the ED clinicians. The ED deals with the patient, but there's no update as far as WCP is concerned until basically the actual formal handover has been done. So it's a bit late in that regard, but that's irrespective. But all I'm demonstrating here is we've got some flowcharts which show how things work and where there are potential dangers as a result of that, which could be resolved if there was a more integrated system. Of particular complexity and of concern, of course, is the ED to medical paging. That's when you need to bring someone down from a medical specialty for a view or an opinion or whatever, a consult. All sorts of dangers and issues that relate to this because systems are not joined up, and it requires the use of medical paging to get someone down, and that is relying on one doctor talking to another doctor whilst they're really busy with big lists of work, and it's many cases it just requires luck for them to get together. Whilst all this is going on, the patient is sitting there suffering. The EAS system, again, EAS system is a fairly decent in-house developed system. Whether or not it has some longevity from a technical point of view or not is questionable. But long and short of it, the whole point, the EAS system, interestingly, is used as a admission system between ED and medical wards. It's only used by 30% of users across the sites, but the key point here is the amount of time taken due to both the paper systems and the various other systems in clerking in. You've got approximately 75 to 80 hours of doctor time taken a week to do some of that around the admissions that we get. What Ambu will go through, he will show the paper admissions form. This is a 14-pager, as you can see here. Bit of a nightmare in terms of filling that in for each admission. Similarly, you know the stories in terms of WNCR and the nurse assessments and all that type of thing. So, there's the usual issues along with that. In the 21st century, we're still using paper notes and paper documents. The challenges and issue we might have with that, where that is accessibility to it, that is still the master. And although Dr. Ambu's writing there is pretty clear, it's not always the case that's not always the case. The other key thing that Dr. Ambu and the other clinicians have highlighted is that none of these systems are two-way, and although information can be found, it's generally a bit of detective work required where people need to jump into different systems to try and get a view separately. So there isn't that consolidated and one view. And that's assuming there's information in those systems. There's also the necessity, of course, to refer to the paper document as well. So the time it takes, the elongated time to do a lot of that is an issue. And Dr. Ambu can present that far better than me. This flow diagram, there's just a selection of these flow diagrams that have been taken out of the work that we've done assessing some of our pathways from an information perspective. It simply shows the silos of system that we've got and the dangers of that, and the duplication of information across different systems, which in some cases is inconsistent and not the same, which again presents a danger. What Dr. Ambu will do, we'll take through a typical patient story. This is a real patient story where actually a patient has come in suffering with some level of confusion, and cut a long story short, basically goes into a loop really in terms of some of the things that happen to them. But long and short of it, you have a scenario where a patient attends ED, the ED doctors think that they need to have an endoscopy. By the time the paper document in an ED scenario gets down to the endoscopists and that department, they recognise and realise that patient's already had an endoscopy and the result has come back as not being an issue, so we need to do some further investigation. The time it takes for that to happen, the patient and the family get annoyed about it and self-discharge. They then come back even more sick, and we have not got to the root cause of the problem because we have not got joined up systems which enable clinicians to realise that an endoscopy has been done before and that they need to move on to other areas. This particular situation led to patient harm and obviously a lot of dissatisfaction by the patient and a lot of blocking up of beds. So, real issues because of the disconnect of information and information systems. And in particular, in terms of a summary, we've got lots of silos is the point around the patient. What Dr. Ambu has done, which is useful, is, what if information was pushed into something else? So from an assessment point of view, a lot of those things, instead of having to be written, could actually be filled in. Not to say that is the solution. We don't want to digitize a paper system, of course. We do need to re-engineer the whole thing, but just by way of example, we have got some of the information that's required in these Clarkin forms in systems. If they were pushed through into something, then you'd obviously fill in a lot of that automatically. There is a view from the clinicians as well, a cross-cutting view that the clinical decision support tools are nowhere near what's expected. There is an expectation that there should be guides to prescribing. There should be the ability to tackle unjustified variations. There should be a reduction in waste, automation, and better decision making, better decision support. Of course, the reality of clinical decision support is that there's no single clinical data repository to support it. So to get an intelligent clinical decision support system, we need integrated platforms for that to work. There's a poor level of clinical consensus on the pathways and processes. So, a big thing we need from a change point of view within BCU. In BCU, we've got some real issues in that, different sites, different specialties in different integrated healthcare communities want to do things different ways. There is not sufficiently strong enough design authority or clinical leadership. These things need to be addressed in any of the changes we happen. We have agreed some design principles such as simplify, standardize, and share, things like that. Those things have got to be implemented if we are to have any sort of chance of doing things. And we need to combine data if we're to be able to support clinical decision support tools. I guess summing up Ambu's and the clinician's view on the world, and please bear in mind, these are things that are coming from external challenges and reviews on some of our services. So the recent challenge and review on vascular, for instance, highlighted the necessity for a single patient record across BCU. And clearly there is not a single patient record across Wales. But anyway, so it's not just our clinicians that are saying that. Our processes are highly fragmented and each of the applications are standalone with no integration between them. We still have handwritten documents and manual input is required into each system. We have got to simplify and standardize. What's the 80% of things we do for 80% of the patients? There must be standard practice and less variability across the health board. That's something which is absolutely key. And similar to that, we obviously need the systems to support that. What Dr. Ambu believes is we need to improve continuity in care delivery. We need to be able to make decisions with access to the full facts, which we haven't got now. We need to make far better use of clinicians' time. The amount of time taken in duplication and all that it means significantly less time to care. And we need to enable better decisions on diagnoses based on more accurate information, because in many cases now, many of our clinicians are making decisions blind of the information. Just going to pause there because I've got my on-call call. So just from a clinician's point of view, and we're not saying this is 100%, this is an opinion, what are the potential top 3 things which would help to solve these issues? Well, first of all, a single combined cross-discipline view of patients' clinical records. So not the fragmentation and separation that we've got now. A combined cross-discipline clinical task list with task management. So a clinical desktop where clinicians could see all the tasks that are assigned to them. So where there is a referral potential or an ask from ED to a specialty, for sake of argument, we know that task list is there. The doctor knows the task list is prioritised, and they can respond as a result of that. And we know there's that closed loop in terms of sorting that out. And there's cross-discipline in terms of coordinated management of orders, which is important. Bed management and various other things came up as well. But anyway, I need to go on my on-call now, so I'll be back soon. So that's the conclusion of the clinical problem aspect. We'll stop there, have a bit of a discussion, and just to clarify some of the points raised, etc. I think our plan is to present to the Office of the Medical Director, baby execs, etc., where it really makes the most sense, really. So what's our IT applications problem? This is an assessment from the ICT team itself across our applications portfolio. Been a lot of discovery work going on, links to our information asset owners and information asset register. And this is across our current applications portfolio. The issues we've got, well, there's 380 plus applications. A lot of them are best of breed and niche applications. There's negligible integration, lots of data silos. But the biggest issue, of course, of concern is to date there are potentially 114 of those that are considered to have a high risk of failure. They may not be properly supported, might not fully understand them, might be out of contract, so on and so forth. That presents a significant risk, of course. We have been applying the Gartner time quadrant approach. Do we tolerate an application? Do we invest in it? Do we eliminate it or migrate it? That's what we've been doing. We've been doing an assessment across all our applications. This is just a sample of 30 of them, and you can see there in terms of the performance and different criteria in which we've looked at the capability of the applications and how sustainable they will be, including things which aren't on there, which is in terms of the contracts that we've got with external suppliers, our knowledge of them, etc. That's how we've made the assessment in terms of which ones we need to address. Having a situation where potentially 114 are considered to be high risk of failure is a significant issue. That is not going to be resolved overnight. That's a 5 to 10 year program if we were to replace them point by point. So we need to think about that and the risks that we're dealing with there. So as well as the clinical risks we talked about, we've also got the risks on our applications. Of course, we understand the situation with the national applications. Clearly, some of those national applications have served Wales well over many years. However, many of them are based on legacy technologies. They're on-premise applications. And again, there are lots of data silos there. So some big challenges in terms of how you effectively integrate and support those applications. It's also recognised that there are hundreds of people working in DHCW to support and maintain the infrastructure and all of that around that, which is extremely high cost with due consideration to modern approaches to developing and supporting applications in the cloud native environment. So clearly a big challenge potentially for DHCW and Wales to migrate from this legacy estate. And of course, we in BCU are using a lot of these applications right now, and they're core to running a lot of what we do at the moment. So again, we'll pause there for a discussion about some of that and what do we do with that. Really try to take the macro view here, not get into a lot of the detail, but appreciating that there is detail there to be discussed. The other thing that we need to consider is, so we've talked about the problems, and of course, with the levels of risks we're talking about, the clinical risks, the external reviews on some of our services, and the risks on the applications themselves, and the risks, of course, from a cyber attack from having unsupported or legacy-based applications that will not potentially run on future operating systems and environments. Putting all those to one side, they're things that really need to push and engender the need for change. We also need to make sure that we're taking due consideration of the future health and care requirements for digital data and technology, and things like the Healthier Wales point. Not sure in England whether or not they're really doing this, and there's an opportunity for Wales in this regard. It's really clear that we cannot simply look at applying digital to automate our existing sickness system, to automate the existing systems we've got, even though we desperately need technology to do some of that, as in automate some of our acute practices and processes, or primary care processes, or community processes, or whatever. Definitely need to digitize those things. But we have to look at the left shift. We have to look at how we can take a system-wide view to deliver, of course, the quintuple aims in terms of improving outcomes, reducing costs, and so on and so forth. We've got to think about the new models of care and the changing system overall, which includes prevention, self-care, and all of that, and making sure that any EPR approach, electronic patient record approach, is not based on the old models of care, is based on how it can also enable future models of care. And that needs to be a strong consideration when we're thinking about future options. The future, of course, is about place-based integrated health and well-being ecosystems. And there's two ecosystems in play here, and people often get confused. And I'm thinking in particular, one particular ecosystem in terms of delivering good health and well-being is actually, how are we dealing with the wider determinants around health? What is the circle of care around a patient? And the circle of care is often the case, not just the caregivers, it is the family. It could be community groups, it could be third sector, or all of that. So it's critical that we are thinking about how we enable those multidisciplinary teams, which includes well-being teams, which might be outside of the traditional NHS or local authority, or even independent providers like care homes. How do we enable a heterogeneous community-based system of people through digital to deliver better services? How do we enable patients or people themselves and take due consideration of wider determinants such as housing, education, information, social support, all of that? How does digital enable that system-wide approach? It's really an important consideration there. And of course, from a digital point of view, there are also, so as well as the health and care ecosystem, or the health and well-being ecosystem, which you've got on the left there, which is about the people as much as anything else. On the right-hand side there, I'm also highlighting the fact that to support that, there is actually a digital ecosystem, which means there is an ecosystem of different suppliers who develop lots of apps and devices based on individual needs, people's wants and conditions. There is a system out there right now. Of course, the big problem, of course, is that's creating lots of silos as well at the moment. So there's an opportunity, I would suggest, with due regard to Tech Cymru and SBRI and things like that, there's an opportunity to think about how Wales can be a platform to enable more integrated apps and services to enable better health and well-being in our communities. We've got to recognise the different levels of place as well, community, hyperlocal level, regions, and such. So as well as the health and well-being aspect, I mean, the things clinicians generally are generally focused on healthcare delivery itself, and I'm saying from a medical perspective. And I only raise this because it's something that's been, relevant. There was the Topol review in England, and Eric Topol talks about the human GIS, the Geographical Information System. He believes that we should be able to map that with the data and the technologies that we've got of today. Yes, we can do that. And he talks about the 10 ohms. Yes, it does start with the genome. Bear in mind that, having done some work with Genomics England, there is the ability to sequence the genome very, very quickly and more cheaply than ever before, and that data is going to be there. But there's also, how do we collect data in terms of the experience people have, physical movements and all that, use of joints, etc., the social contact they have, their social graph, modeling the body. There are many capabilities that can be used in mobile devices and cheap devices and so on and so forth now, which can enable that. But all of this, if the future of healthcare is about precision medicine, is about precision healthcare interventions, etc., it is wholly dependent on mappy genomes, one thing, but all the other ohms, many of the other ohms, are wholly dependent on a combined longitudinal record that not only links to the genome, but also has other data which can be combined to provide that rounded view of the human GIS. And that's something that was talked about in 2015. And I think is definitely something that is being worked on, certainly at pace in parts of England and by the centre in England, and should be a consideration here in Wales to go on the coattails of England, I would suggest, and parts of the States on this, with due regard to the National Data Repository and Store and what's required for that. So again, that's a future requirement, and it requires, just to repeat, open systems and open data. So we can pause there for discussion about some of that. So with all that in mind, with those problems in mind, including the strategic future that we need to enable, what's our EPR strategy, or what's our digital healthcare platform strategy to address those things? I wanted just to do a bit of education here. Now, I appreciate this will be patronising to colleagues in DHCW and Helen and people like that, but just in particular for our execs, really, just to use the analogy of audio here and music to show the difference of different types of systems. So people will know that if you buy a record, a vinyl record, it's an all or nothing. The music is on there. It's pressed there forever. That's how it is. It's fixed. It's an all or nothing. That's what you get. What you get is what you're given, and that's it. You also have, of course, in the music industry, if you think about my time when I was recording the top 40, although you needed a bit of skill to do that, ultimately you could record your own mix of music, so record certain things that you wanted, perhaps off the radio or off records or whatever, and have your own mixtapes really that are for you. As long as you've got skills to do that, then you're able to do it, and obviously there's some technicalities around that. And now today, as things have moved on, now we're into since the 90s really, we've got the ability through Spotify and Amazon Music and all the rest of it, we've got the ability to actually personalize playlists from the cloud. You can get some personal list based on your mood and how things are today, and it can easily be composed what you want. And I use that as a really great analogy of different systems. So we do talk in IT of lots of different methods for electronic patient records. You can buy the big thing in England at the minute, which might be potentially seen as a quick win, you can buy monolithic applications which are all or nothing. These are applications which are composite applications, electronic patient record systems, things like Epic, Cerner, Meditech, etc., which actually incorporate all of the functionality. They're all linked together. They drop those, they support those. It's an all or nothing. One provider, you go for that, you make the relevant trade-offs, but it's an integrated composite system. You get it all done for you. It's pressed. There you go. The other option for an electronic patient record approach is where you've got a lot of best-of-breed applications, which you could say we've got in Wales, maybe not in BCU so much, but there are some level of best-of-breed in there where you've got lots of separates. If you've got the skills and capabilities, although it's extremely complicated, you can actually have a lot of best-of-breed integrate. You could take an integration approach where you integrate the data from those best-of-breed in order to give you a more of a combined view, but it can be complicated. And what you can do these days is with modern technologies and taking more of a service-based architecture, you can build lots of different components. If you think about a lot of the capabilities, cloud-based capabilities that have been developed in many industries today, you can take a more of a composable approach where lots of different components are combined to provide a solution on a platform. So this is the composable business approach to integration. That's where you compose different components based on a particular need. The monolithic applications, generally got to recognize as well, a lot of those applications were designed based on the healthcare system of the past. So a lot of the traditional EPRs are legacy technologies, really. But nevertheless, the composite applications, you pass the risk all onto them for the delivery. You get what you're given, and they support and implement that. It's generally 2000s, 1990s, 2000s type technologies. From an applications point of view, from 2003, 2014 is the sort when the people used to do more of the applications integration type approach. Maybe not so much in Wales that much, but certainly since 2014 in out there in business land, they've been developed. There's been the cloud native development of composable business applications using web services and reusing components to deliver applications and services designed around individual needs and wants. 95%, unfortunately, healthcare isn't digitized yet, to be honest, but 95% of EPRs today that are provided are monolithic. So there's some examples there. I've chucked some examples in there which are least popular but are used in Wales. So things like Care Director, EMIS, the GP system, for instance. But the big players, Epic, TPP, the biggest GP provider of them all, Liquid Logic, the biggest social care provider, Allscripts, Cerner, all that. They're functionally rich, these systems. They will automate and provide a better result than what we've got now to enable our clinical practice and process, but they are monolithic applications and ultimately do not allow the flexibility and configurability to enable the personalization and individualization we're going to need potentially in future. Best of breed. Well, yeah, I mean, we could say that the Welsh scenario is best of breed. We have got some best of breed, and I understand there is some level of integration, which is okay. However, that's potentially more integrated data as opposed to integrated workflows and decision support. And obviously, with that type of environment, those number of applications potentially on different platforms, different databases, different data formats, and all of that, the integration challenge can be complex and costly. So, that's potentially, I suspect, the environment we're in, but I'm sure it will be open to argument. The future state then, which is the future of applications in my opinion, is where you have the development of a industry cloud platform, or a platform approach which enables people to develop components or compose services, reuse services. So if you've got a booking service, for instance, you can reuse a booking service for lots of different applications, and that could be part of different applications. So the opportunity we've got here is the possibility. There are suppliers out there, for instance, Container Solutions. Google Health have developed a platform. Microsoft are probably the more mature health platform. And I know in Wales, we've invested in the Google stuff. Amazon have got a healthcare platform. But nevertheless, those platforms also have value-added additional component and capability that you can reuse and use to deliver the services that you want. There are some new entrants in the EPR market, such as Alcidion, who provide a more open platform approach. Better, in theory, provide an open platform approach, but it's a closed platform as well in terms of their willingness to open the data, the open air type data. I'm suggesting here that potentially there are partners out there that you could potentially go into a joint venture with. Your Synonetics, your Container Solutions, your DHCW could potentially build up some skills and capability to develop cloud native applications, which, coupled with an integrated data fabric, an integration layer based on Fire. I'm aware of the NDR sits on the Google Cloud Platform. There are numerous ways in which you can do Fire-based integration. Lots of things which have been built in other places, integrated care records, Yorkshire number, for instance, and so on and so forth. Those things combined can help us to move towards a more composable approach and a cloud native EPR, which is what I think is the future that we need. Because by doing that and opening your data in this way, you open up to different components being delivered for individualized needs, so you meet the individual needs. A possible future, I appreciate this is an old slide. Gartner predicted the end of the future of applications all being componentized and cloud-based within the next 5 years. So this is an illustration which allows us to move from the bottom of the old world, the mode 1 world, which is the heterogeneous and hybrid services that we've got at the moment. And you might say the records equivalent, the vinyl record equivalent, which might be WCCIS, might be WNCR, WPAS and the like. You look to integrate those through point integrations into a common Fire data store, which I suspect may exist now, but a lot of that can be just copied and moved over from other places that have done it successfully. The NDR potentially has the sitting on the Google Cloud Platform, I understand, has the ability to potentially be a Fire data store for us, and the opportunity for developing open APIs, which means you can start to develop and help us move from the old world to new world and start developing the new Patchwork EPR, as we're calling it, components above the Fire data store, and build those component by components and gradually migrate across. So that ultimately is our proposition for moving across. I guess it's a fairly standard method across all other industries. England would be scared of this because of the risks associated. I think England are going to look instead to deliver a monolith approach. This is a 5 to 10 year change process, in my opinion, but nevertheless, I think this is the one that we should be going towards, and this is what's happening in all other industries. So it's something that has to happen in the healthcare industry as well, and Wales can potentially steal a match on that. Of course, all of these would have to be subject to a proper strategic outline case which laid out the options, but it's fairly obvious that this is the way that we would probably need to go. So the considerations for us, well, we either do nothing, we continue as we are now, and look to replace. So those 114 applications looking to replace, or maybe consolidate some of those, but consolidate some of those on more best of breed, which might be a mix of on-premise, or ultimately just put off problems, still create more legacy, still create more technical debt, and still create more data silos. So we can do that to mitigate risks more immediately, or we can move to more of a point-to-point application integration approach. I know there's things like WRRS and things like that. I'm unclear about what the integration broker is in DHCW. We're using some level of mirth in BCU. We need to be very clear what our integration engine and platform is. And potentially you could look to reduce data duplication by just doing data integration. That's not combined workflow and the like that you would get in a monolith, for instance. We could purchase a composite EPR. This is the monolith approach. Again, it's a big bang. It's a significant cost and business change, and you're locked in then, and you will get ripped off if you just follow the lessons of the past, the lessons in the States and everywhere else. The big monolith vendors lock you in and then bleed you dry. However, what they do is they provide a composite electronic patient record system, and although it costs a few million quid, they do the change, and that's a highly functional and great system for running the systems of today. So it would solve a lot of the immediate issues quite quickly, but it would be a big bang approach. It's a big procurement, it's a big implementation, so you'd have to wait some time for all of that, and it'd be a big bang approach. But it's an option that needs to be considered. Or we can take the preferred option, which is more innovative, and with that comes some risks, and that's procure a digital healthcare platform. That is, what is the platforms on which we can start developing new capability and start to develop our EPR in a patchwork manner. So use case by use case, address some of those more immediate issues first, and then align that to an overall feature. So component by component, we start to migrate away from the legacy environment and develop a componentized EPR in a patchwork way. It requires working with development partners, so it requires a lot of investment in business change. It requires a lot of clinical input into that, so we are almost jointly developing with partners new capability. So actually, maybe a joint venture is or a joint venture with a group of partners is the possible option. We've come up with a bit of a map for this, a BCU specific patchwork EPR diagram, very similar to the, as you might expect, the future of applications diagram there and proposal. Basically, what we have here is the necessity to put in place a integration layer locally and get skilled up with some high-level skills, not high-level skills, detailed skills in terms of how to do integration in an effective way. We've got to think about data mapping. We've got to think about the semantics as well as the mapping into things like FHIR, for instance. I think FHIR would be our preference over OpenAir, which is more restrictive, although explicit. But you might want a joint thing there, because I understand DHCW are doing both. So it's not to say there's anything against OpenAir, but you might need to consider both. But FHIR seems to be the most adaptable for a use case by use case type approach. What we need to do is the ball and string integration approach with some of our systems. There's a mix there in the application layer below of the old legacy systems. So it's not just the Welsh systems like WPAS, some of our own systems. CETO would be our document management system, for instance. We'd want to maintain that and integrate that into our data store. ePro, and so on and so forth. Our different systems have those integrated in a point-by-point way, but have our own data repository, not just a clinical data repository, which it says there, it needs an administrative data repository as well. We'd want to go, start as we mean to go on. So we would be looking at hosting that in the cloud. Could that be part of the NDR? Could be. To be discussed. It would probably make sense. Microsoft, I appreciate, are the most mature in terms of digital health platforms and tools and the like, but Google are there, and I appreciate the investment made by Google, by DHCW, so it might make sense to align there, and there's no skin off anyone's nose ultimately in our regard, with regard to that. But we would look to partners who can develop a capability around the Google cloud platform if that was the case. Our data repository would link in, of course, to the national systems and data repositories. We've seen some of the national diagrams, and it seems as though we've got the ability to do that, and that would be the thought nationally in terms of how you would link health boards to the national repositories. We'd clearly want to work in a data governance point of view with folk nationally in terms of how we manage all of the data quality issues, the data mapping, the semantics and all of that. Very key to make sure the data side is right, and it's critical for this to be a success. But what we would then look to do is develop our Patchwork EPR with partners to accelerate the development of that. A lot of this stuff's already been done, so we'll be looking at partners who've helped to develop some of that. There's an ecosystem of partners that we're aware of, which can do some of this development for us fast. So yeah, could be clinical functionality there, could be a patient, well, not a patient portal, a single point of access for clinicians. All sorts could be there for visibility and addressing some of those issues that we've raised incrementally. So that would be our potential approach going forward. Yeah, the benefits, I've talked about some of those before in terms of the clinical benefits and so on and so forth. How would we look to do it? Well, based on experience of work done in the past, you'd split the work into units with a partner. So we think, talking to some partners, done some work with a couple of partners before in terms of re-engineering the EPR that was in place in York and Scarborough. Actually, with some suppliers, we think actually in 5 years you should be able to have a viable EPR for the system, a component-sized EPR, which could be a major competitor to the current EPR market. There are connotations in that bit of the discussion, and whether or not we share that more widely, I don't know. But fundamentally, there is opportunity in this from a commercial point of view, I would suggest, if we're helping to develop this. These are things that we think we would be looking to do in the first instance to address some of those issues that we mentioned. It's a start of this, so clearly cloud platform integration service would be important. Task and workflow management, we talked about some of those issues in the clinical problems. Order management is key. E-observations, I appreciate this cuts across some of the old legacy systems, so it's difficult to think, it's difficult, and it's going to be hard, some of this, but we might have some parallel working, I don't know. But these are some suggestions in terms of what we might be doing in the first 2 years, and 3 to 4 needs to be assessed. In terms of the team to do this, well, we're looking at about 2.5 million quid a year to be able to do this. Note that we do need to build, and I appreciate some of this might be in DHCW now or in other places. This is the worst case scenario, but we'd suggest a joint team. We need to take this as a more multidisciplinary approach. So we'd be expecting clinical leads, service designers, UX designers, user researchers, etc., engaging with particular areas, looking to simplify and standardize the practice, the processes before digitizing. So with digitization in mind, co-produce the development of these capabilities and these components. So to do that, we'd need to invest a lot in service redesign, and in particular, we'd be looking to backfill and bring in clinicians from particular areas to be directly engaged in this work. We can't be doing it in isolation. You'll see there the development team that we've set up. That's what we think would be required, and talking to some external partners, as I've done in the past, that's the sort of cost level if we were to do that, but we'd have to recruit some of our own people as well, where we've got gaps, because we have got zero maturity in this area, so we'll be very reliant on partners in the first instance. So that is an annual cost to get some of this stuff done. Just to note, really, so 2.5 million times 4 is 10 million quid. And that is potentially just us buying that outright and developing our own EPR type of approach and buying in components as and when, versus the cost of EPRs out there. That is still less than that, and we've got an asset, a public sector asset. What we've got here is just a summary of the program I've just talked about, and some of the things which are critical to enable this. So for our clinical areas, for instance, our Office of the Medical Director, we really need to get much tougher when it comes to clinical design authority and design principles. So we've agreed some design principles with execs and the like. Not sure if people really get what they're about. So business clinical, we need to simplify and standardize our practice, our processes, our capabilities. We need to be clear about our funding sources. So ultimately, pretty obvious some of the things that are said there. A lot to do to start this off, and I guess this is our starter for 10 really. So what we do want to do is get the views really of people around this. Are we in the right ballpark? Are we strategically in the right place? I believe that we are. We need to be brave to do this. We also need to recognise, in the world of today, where the skills shortages and all that, we have not got the capabilities to do this ourselves, in my view. We've definitely not got the capabilities in PCU. And I don't know about DHCW, but I'd be very surprised if we've got capability in DHCW with due consideration for what we might be paying some of that capability in DHCW and the legacy applications they're supporting and developing right now. So there needs to be some due consideration for that, and how do we sustain things going forward.